Hey, everybody, welcome to the podcast today. Many of you guys are going to know the song Worthy of It All. Well, the guy, Ryan Hall, who's with me today, he wrote that song with David Breimer. So if you like that song, hey, tune in to the podcast today. Ryan's also the executive director of the Franklin Prayer House right outside of Nashville, Tennessee, where they're doing almost 60 hours a week of live worship and prayer, which is pretty amazing. He and his wife Karen are worship leaders, songwriters, recording artists, and so excited to talk to Ryan today and hear what God's doing in the Nashville area and hear some of his journey. I think this is going to encourage you all who love to worship, love to pray, want to see revival, and want to see Jesus glorified. I think you're going to be encouraged and equipped today as Ryan and I share. We got to meet Ryan in person for the first time. Welcome to the podcast. We got to meet for the first time recently in Dallas. We got to go out and get some Panera together, and it was great. Great to have you with us, man.
Thanks, Matthew. It's good to be here, man.
Yeah. So we've had a couple of phone conversations over the years, and then finally got to connect, and I was like, well, I enjoyed getting to hang out with Ryan. Let's bring him on the podcast and welcome some other people to tune in and overhear our conversation today. So, yeah, how was that for an intro? Is there anything else we missed? Just your first time on the podcast. We'd love for you to just introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, my beautiful wife, Karen, and then
Yes.
we got two little ones that are with us, little girl and little boy. We moved out here from Pasadena, California. Our kind of entrance into the prayer movement was at Pi Hop with under Cheryl Allen. You made reference to the song with David, and that came out of one of our nights of worship and prayer on a Friday night in the prayer room in Pasadena. That was kind of the genesis of that song, and obviously David's incredible. Like the lion's share came out of him, but it was just a beautiful moment that came out of community and just people going after the presence of God. So, but yeah, came out here in 2016 with just a heart to, we touched the Tabernacle of David. Well, we'll probably talk about that a little bit in the
Be
rest
happy
of
to do
our
that.
time
Yeah.
together. But once you touch that, you're changed forever. So when we came out here to Franklin, Tennessee, we just wanted to keep doing what we were doing, and we've been at that for a little over 7 years now out here in Franklin, Tennessee. So, but I think you got most of that. We're
Yeah, that's
also
amazing.
overseas quite a bit. So there's some things the Lord's doing in Europe,
Mm.
like that are very in similar streams of what we're doing here, and just feel really called to establish places of His presence everywhere we go. So,
Come on. I love it. Awesome. Well,
yeah.
I'd be curious if you wouldn't mind maybe just go back a little bit even earlier. Like, how did you get into this whole world? I mean, this is an interesting kind of thing to be doing that you guys are doing almost 60 hours a week of live worship and prayer. Obviously, you were at Pi Hop in Pasadena, so that was maybe, like you said, some intro into that. But how did you get kind of called into ministry and sort of end up where you are?
Yeah, it's really kind of crazy. My wife is born and raised in the church. She has like an amazing lineage of pastors and worship leaders in her history. And I actually came to know the Lord right out of college. Like I actually had a radical encounter with the Lord in France in 1998, which is going to age me. but but hey, it is what it is.
Sure.
It had a radical encounter with the Lord in a cathedral in France in 1998. Turned my whole world upside down. Came home and the Lord
Can
really
I
started.
can I just like interrupt you and like I'm so curious about the cathedral in France. I mean,
Yeah,
that's just. Do you mind sharing, giving us like a minute of what that was?
sure. I was in a performing arts college and we did some choral tours in Europe, which like that sounds like really romantic, but at the time it was like something we did in school. Born, raised in Southern California. And my third year in school, we were doing a tour of this cathedral and then we were singing inside. And I just find this stuff interesting. I didn't know any better. Like I didn't know the Lord before this. So,
Wow.
they're showing us the iconography on the outside of the cathedral. We're right about to walk in to sing, and there's the separation of the sheep and the goats. It's the judgment seat of Christ.
Wow.
All the apostles holding the ways they were martyred. None of that meant anything to me. It just was
Yeah.
kind of like, whoa, that's intense. Came inside and we sang. This is a Gothic cathedral outside of Paris. We're singing the Ave Maria. And at the end of this song, the presence of God falls on me and I fall out in the middle of the
What?
choir and just like felt a huge hand fall on me. I'm just weeping uncontrollably and just saying, God is big, God is big. And all my
Hmm.
friends thought I lost my mind. My directors were just like, "Oh, he's really moved by the music," you know. Um, and that
Man.
presence of God that touched
Yes.
me when we came back and when I eventually ended up in the church. Anytime there was moments of sung worship, that same presence that touched
Mm.
me in that space in France is the same presence that touches me today, that touched me, last night when we're in a set at the prayer room. It's the
Yes.
same God,
Hmm.
and so that was that. And what's crazy is like since we came to Nashville, we've been going back over to France, and I got to take my wife and my two kids to the very place where I met the Lord in '98, and there's nothing like, that just being able to show them the history of like this is where I met the Lord. Like I didn't have that experience, and then I had that, and now I'm never going back.
That's so cool. And you were
So
like, this was high school for you?
my third year in college.
Oh, college. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Cool.
So
That's such a cool story. Thank you
yeah,
for
that's
sharing
crazy,
that.
man. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So you have this encounter, and then yeah, let's pick up on the journey there.
yeah. So came back, met my wife in '99.
Yeah.
So very early in my walk with the Lord, was just kind of like, well, now that I know this God, like, how do I serve Him with everything? And the only thing that was kind of given to me at that time was like, I should probably go to Bible college. So ended up in my then girlfriend, now wife's, family's Bible college in Pasadena, California. One of the first things they're teaching me is the Tabernacle of David, and in my mind, I'm like, oh, this is what everyone gets. You sign up for Bible college, and they're teaching you the Tabernacle of David. So,
If only.
it, yeah, I'm like, this is everyone's experience, right? And I didn't know any better. But then I
Yeah.
hear about David,
Yeah.
this king in the Old Testament, who loved the presence of God and was touched by the presence of God like I was, and I was like, I just wanted to live my whole life that way.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of the introduction to the Tabernacle of David. And then that kind of took me into a 10-year stint of working in corporate America, which is the exact same thing. But just had a season of bivocational ministry
Yeah.
and working by day and like grabbing my guitar and going and leading somewhere or being in the presence of God somewhere. And during that season, met Cheryl Allen from Pi Hop, and she was always, Ryan, you could do this all of your days, and in my mind, I'm like, that's what I want to do,
Yeah.
And it was 2011, 2012, that like little season right there, where the Lord made space for us to jump in, and we've been in the prayer movement since 2012 full time.
Yeah. That's
So
cool. I love
yeah,
that. So you were always musical, I guess, because you were singing in these
yeah,
choirs in
right,
France. So I
yeah.
guess when you came to really know the Lord, I guess the transition into being a worship leader, was that pretty natural for you?
Yeah, I wasn't raised in the church again, so I just love the presence of God so much. I found myself on the worship team, like
Yeah.
as a backup vocalist, and I was just completely content. Like
Hmm.
I was just getting lost in God. I probably was like the super enthusiastic one on the team because I was freshly saved, man. Like I'm like,
Right.
this is God,
Yeah.
And I had a couple people ask me like, "Would you ever want to lead worship?" And I was like, "Nah, it's okay."
Yeah.
I didn't even think that was a
Huh.
thing. Um, was in a church, got saved into a Foursquare church, and that was kind of my first church experience. And prophets come to town. I don't know what prophets are,
Right.
and they're giving out words. I don't know what these mean. And a prophet came to town and said I would play instruments and write songs. And so I asked my parents, I was like, well, I should probably get a guitar because this man of God just told me I should do this,
Right.
And my then girlfriend, now wife, taught me my very first four chords.
Oh, cool.
And my only thought was that I wanted to be able to facilitate worship outside of the church service because this was the late 90s, early 2000s. We didn't have Apple Music or
Right.
Spotify.
Yeah.
Listeners, like, can you believe that? Like, there was a day we didn't have YouTube. I had to,
Yeah.
like, get CDs.
Yeah.
So that was the only reason I wanted to play. And it's just been kind of like amazing to just watch what the Lord will do.
Yeah. 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 So I'm curious. You are creative. You're a worship leader. You're musical, but you're also a leader, like a ministry, organizational leader as well. And so one
Yeah.
of the things I thought it would be fun to ask you about is what that's like, because in my experience, those don't always go together, or they don't go together very well in terms of
Right.
personalities and giftings. And a lot of times, a creative type isn't the type of person that's, maybe super administrative or coordinating 60 hours a week of worship and prayer. So,
Right.
yeah, I'm just curious, what's that like for you? Like, and maybe like, how did you end up in leadership? Because it sounds like you're just content to sing. And then someone's like, "Oh, maybe you should go guitar." So you got a guitar. But you're still. It sounds like you're still kind of just serving, following as you get an invitation. But then you found yourself. It seems like in really some major ministry leadership roles. And so, like, how does kind of your leadership develop? Does that
Well,
make
it's
sense?
interesting. Yeah, totally. I think that there's different types of leaders, right?
Sure.
There's leaders in the church that are heavy teachers, like just equippers, and that's just like where they're going to go, and that's their lane. I would probably say over the 20 some odd years of ministry, I've discovered that my gift sets probably land more in the pastoral space.
Hmm.
I have like a huge heart for just people. So
Yeah.
even when I was in corporate America, I used to tell my wife, if I wrote down all the things that I loved about my job, you would think I was a pastor, like taking care of
Uh,
people and envisioning people for what their role is and all these things, like you just
yeah.
kind of realize throughout life, you just kind of recognize the way that the Lord uses you. And then like as you get older, you kind of lean into those spaces. So
Hmm.
I, as a creative, like coming out of school, um, I was the classic, like, scattered, like, not organized person and had a couple things fall apart on me, like,
Hmm.
early on, like, just in work. Like, went to school for performing arts, was gonna, try to do musical theater, and then God got a hold of me and that's probably another podcast.
Hmm.
But took me in a completely different direction. But during that time, had a couple like missed opportunities and missed appointments, and had a really dear friend of mine that was just like, "You need a planner," you know, and literally like taught me how to use a planner.
Yeah.
Was in corporate America, like every time you get onboarded, they're teaching you organizational things. And for
Right.
some reason, like I latched onto that, and like a part
Hmm.
of my brain like just grabbed a hold of that stuff. And like still to this day, like if you saw my calendar and if you saw the way that I like kind of organize things, a lot of that was the Lord helping me because I was
Yeah.
going to be in deep trouble. I have huge sympathy for folks that are like, I don't know what my week looks like. And I'm like, I know what that feels like. So it definitely was the Lord like
Yeah.
helping like equip me because there can be some places where if I was just left to my original like creative devices, it would be disaster.
Yeah.
But then I've kind of learned to love those things and lean into those things and realize actually how they are pastoral tools, like
Mm.
to care for people and to create boundaries and all of those things. And the Lord's teaching me still how to create boundaries in my own life and, all of
Yeah.
those things. So, but yeah, that's a lot of that. And honestly, like the 60 hours and all of that, you and I think even talked about this when we had a meal together. That's the Lord. Like we're doing everything wrong an idea of like a visionary leader trying to mobilize people unto an end. Like
Right.
we are not following that script. Like we've given ourselves to ministering to the Lord and trusting that the Lord will build the house. And he really has. Like the stories are kind of incredible. I just was talking with a worship leader the other day who wants to start leading with us, and was just kind of telling her some of the stories of like our failed weakness turned into like a new person showing up and running a set that she shouldn't have been there. Like it's just like there's stories like that.
Yeah.
So there's an element of, I mean, hopefully the majority of the strength of what's happening here is the Lord.
Yeah.
But hopefully that's.
Yeah. I want to talk about that. That's
Yeah.
incredible. I just wanted to ask you about the creative organizational thing. Cause it's just so interesting to me. I'm sitting here, like you can see the books behind me. So my office here is like two sections. So like this is like my computer and my books, and this is like my teacher organizational side. But the other side of the room is like guitars and a djembe and a mandolin and a couch. And it's like, so I even feel even some personal inner tension with this work, because I've got a little bit of a creative musical bent, but then I'm also kind of organizational and thinker and that kind of thing. So I feel that inner tension, and so I always love just getting to know people and figuring out how their life and brain work to
Yeah.
to
Well,
make
and even like
to juggle both of those.
my corporate America experience was accounting. So
Gotcha.
like when people hear that, they're like, what? Like I still to this day, just for fun, like I have some friends that like are running nonprofits that I help their bookkeeping, because it's like a weird place of my brain that I don't get to use very often. And
Yeah.
so I just enjoy doing that for fun, which like if I would have told myself that while I was 10 years in corporate America, I would have laughed, like if I would
Right.
have said, one day you'll do this for fun,
Yeah.
So yeah,
Accounting for fun.
that's right,
I
man.
wouldn't have expected that, honestly. That you just do that for fun.
That's right, man.
But that's cool. Well, look, let's jump back to what you guys are doing there in Franklin, because you kind of started going there, and I wanted to ask you about that anyway. Let you just kind of share some of what's going on with the Franklin Prayer House and the story of that. Is it literally in a house? Is that right?
Yeah, where I'm here right now. There's
Yeah.
actually a set going on downstairs. Yeah, we're in a house. There's a crazy. I mean, I feel like there's a crazy story to like. Anytime you get someone on here, I'm sure there's crazy stories for everything.
Yeah.
But
Well, we're great for crazy stories, so if you want to
yeah,
give it to us.
yeah. So we again, our doorway into the prayer movement was PIHOP, was Pasadena International House of Prayer. And if it were really up to us, we just would still be there, because we
Mm,
just love Cheryl so much, and all our friends out there. But really felt like the Lord was moving us out here. Franklin Prayer House pre-existed us, like the organization. They were doing a lot of like amazing unity stuff in the city of Franklin. We're in the backyard of E.M. Bounds, so like E.M. Bounds' pulpit is literally 2 blocks away. Like
cool.
revival in the late 1800s out on the square, like a block away. Like there's just so much history of prayer out here. So
Yeah.
they were doing amazing unity gatherings, and when we felt the Lord telling us to move, this was one of the places where that was on our radar. And so we had actually asked them, like, hey, if the Lord's moving us, we know immediately, like, we have to have a prayer room. Like,
Yeah.
we just know that. Could we build it under you? And Steve Garrett, who was the director at the time, he was so generous to us and opened up a place for us to start. So in 2016, Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 6 a.m., which was like how we started at PIHOP.
Mm,
Karen and I used to lead the 6 a.m.s when they have a larger space now, but they had a smaller space before.
yeah.
And it was Karen and I at 6 a.m. in an empty room,
Yep.
like just singing to God.
Yeah.
And so when we came here in 2016, that was the only thing we knew how to start.
Yeah.
So we began that way, and just have watched the Lord do crazy things like
Mm,
since then. So,
I love
for
that.
example, I'll just do for example, if that's all right.
Great.
Like
Yeah.
our first 2016 we started. In 2017 we took our first trip overseas to France. That was when I got to take my kids and my wife to the place.
Yeah.
And I was the only worship leader at the time, and so I told Steve Garrett, who's our friend, I was like, "Hey, we'll just close the prayer room down for 3 weeks while we leave, and then I'll just start it right back up again when we get back." When you're
Yeah.
pioneering, like you could do crazy things, you know.
Sure.
And so he was like, "Yeah, sure, sure," you know. And the Tuesday 6 a.m. before we left for France, 12 people showed up to a 6 a.m. set.
That's
And
awesome.
like anyone who's been in the small prayer room, like that's a lot of people for a 6
For
a.m.
6 a.m. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he was like, "We can't shut this down," you know. And I was like, "Well, we're gonna be gone." So they found a couple fill-ins for us. And the first time we left the States while we were building the prayer room stayed open while we left. And one of the gals who was leading while we were gone, like fell in love with just the space to minister to the Lord. And when we came back, she was like, "Can I keep going?" And then
Yeah.
Wednesday, 6 a.m. was born out of her having that experience. And that kind of started a weird pattern that like every time Karen and I would leave, the prayer room would grow. So, like right before we would leave, we'd get a weird call that someone really felt on their heart to start ministering to the Lord, and we were like, "Well, hey, that works out. We're leaving." Like just like
Yeah.
weird stuff like that happening over the last 7 years. That's got us from 4 hours to nearly 60 hours a week. And I think I even told you this when we were together, Matthew. Like we're horrible social media people. We're like the worst. And we've never recruited and we've never like gone after people. We've
Yeah.
always trusted that the Lord would bring people, and it's been incredible.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you're playing to your strengths. You're people. And so you're building relationships, and somebody knows somebody who knows somebody, and you're praying and you're staying faithful, and God's bringing people in. And I love that.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me, I mean, when we started our first prayer room, my wife and I, we'd been married a year and a half, and she was pregnant, and then shortly after we opened up, had our first kid, and we literally didn't know what to do. We were given a prayer room space to use, but we didn't have a team, or you know what I mean. We were doing some like worship nights, but we really didn't know what we were doing. So we had a room, but we were like, well, what are we going to do? Let's just go out there every morning. And I literally sat up front. Somebody gave us a little microphone and some speakers. I sat up front with my guitar, and just sang worship for an hour and a half. And she sat on the couch in the back with our newborn baby, and we let
Whoa.
people know we were doing it. And sometimes people showed up, sometimes people didn't. And that sounds so similar how we kind of pioneered the first house of prayer, 3 or 4 days a week, just going out there in the mornings and like, well, let's just worship. We'll invite people,
Yeah.
but it's really not about that. And so those seasons are, in many ways, they're really sweet because God's doing something in your heart, even though it's also maybe sometimes awkward or challenging
Yeah.
too. It's like you're learning to just be content with God's smile and His presence and ministering to Him. And you want others to experience that too, but at the same time, if God's there, like that's enough. And there's something so sweet and special about those times. So,
Well, I remember when we were doing the 6 a.m.s, I used to make coffee every morning. So
oh
I'd
yeah,
fill like a giant carafe of coffee.
yeah,
And then like, at the end, I'm pouring it all out, you know? I remember
yeah,
I told the Lord one time, and I was really moved because I was just like, there's going to be a day when this is empty.
mm,
And like, the only people that know this moment are you and me,
mm,
and the folks that come early on. Like there was a sweetness in Pi Hop and in Pasadena that even Karen and I kind of came in on the tail end of the kind of the beginnings. But there was
yeah,
a sweetness of the community that was there before it had momentum, where there's such a purity in the motivation for why you're there. And I used to tell that I still tell that to our worship leaders, like
yeah,
there's a season coming that maybe there might be more folks that come. And
right,
there's something sweet about us knowing about this place in this season because the only reason we're here is the Lord. Like
yeah,
there's no other, it's not just a momentum thing that's getting us here. Like we've discovered the treasure,
Mm.
and like, and that can never be taken from you, and I'm so grateful that I came in when I did in Pasadena, because Karen and I in an empty room on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings, that anchored us.
Yeah.
Like we met the man, Jesus,
Right.
there. And because of that, no matter where the Lord puts us on the planet, we know exactly what we're doing.
Mm.
Like we've never thought like, oh, I wonder what the Lord's going to have us do in this season. Like we're like, we know, like we're going to be
Yeah.
at his feet. We're
Yes.
going to Psalm
Come on.
27:4 for the rest of our
Mm-hmm.
days.
Mm-hmm.
And like it, and that will be true of us when we're in our 70s and 80s. Like
Yeah.
there's no, like we have vision. I remember it was one of my favorite things that happened in Pasadena before we moved. I was so wrecked by just giving myself to the prayer movement consistently. And my daughter was born like right after we started, and Lily was born right when we started. So she's the age of how long we've been in the prayer movement.
Yeah.
And she was just had turned 4, and I went out on a run, and I was just like thanking the Lord. This is so, you'll understand this, but I was thanking the Lord for what He had revealed to me of who He was in the
Mm.
last 4 years.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, out of my mouth, I started saying like, "What'll it be like in 6 more years when it's 10 years?" Well,
Yeah.
and then I was like, "What will it be like in 16, 26?" All of a sudden, and the vision wasn't like, "What will I accomplish?" It was, "What will I know of you?"
Yeah. I love that. Mm.
And like, how different will I be because of the knowledge of who you are?
Yeah.
Because I had already been so impacted in 4 years, like that it started giving me vision for long term.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I was just like, and that has stayed with me.
Yeah.
You know, my
I
daughter
love
is going
that.
to be 12 next year, and I still feel the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome.
So,
Yeah. Not what is my ministry going to look like?
yeah,
Yeah. But what's it going to be like knowing you
right.
more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
every
If you
season.
showed me this much in 4 years, what's it going to be like in 40 years? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that incredible?
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's so worth it, man. I love
Yep.
that. Hey, we got a few more minutes. Maybe say a couple minutes on what you guys are doing in the nations, because I don't know if I remembered that you guys were doing stuff in the nations. I'd love to just hear a moment about that, and then we can kind of wrap up, and you can let people know how maybe they can connect with you and that kind of thing. But first, yeah, what are you guys doing overseas?
Yeah, so like everything, like the Lord kind of tricks us, like we always say the Lord's sending plan for us is like have us make deep relationships, then the Lord sows our friends into the nations, and then we go see them. And then the Lord's
Gotcha.
like, surprise, like
Right.
and so we actually, when we moved to Tennessee, our first really close friends were missionaries that were getting ready to be sent to France. And that's actually what got us there in 2017. And through them, we met a group called Bless. They're a UK ministry that actually have a missions base in Normandy, France. And they have, you'll love this, we're prayer people. They have a farm called Bethany,
Oh,
which
cool.
like as soon as you hear that, you're just like, okay, what is happening? And we went out and visited them in 2017 and got immediately impacted by
Mm.
just like it's historically been a place of reconciliation prayer for Protestants and Catholics in France.
Oh, cool.
They've seen amazing things happen through their ministry and through their heart for France and for Europe. And so we started there in 2017, and we've been taking teams back there every year. There's a prayer room there, and there's a lot of things happening in creativity, and they do a lot of outreach to refugee communities that are there in Caen, which is in the port city. And so that's one of the main places we go, to this farmhouse in Bethany. And there's some things developing there. For us here with Franklin Prayer House, we really feel there's a bridge between Franklin and France. Then we've been
Cool.
taking crews over there to basically do what we do here over there,
Yeah.
and have a huge heart for the nation. And then we're connected with a house of prayer in North Devon, in England, and friends of ours in Cornwall, John and Anna White. They're artists and poets and worship leaders, and just a heart to see kind of a shift toward like maintaining rhythms of worship and prayer and devotion. It's all of the stuff we talk about in the prayer movement, like, 24/7 worship. That's great. Also, like people of rhythms, like coming
Yeah.
back to like daily Christianity, week in and week out, day in and day out. And just really kind of investigating and trying to discover and rediscover ancient rhythms of just like what the people of God have been doing like
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
And trying to kind of give space for people to practice those things. And I feel like that's a lot of what we're doing here at the prayer room in Franklin. And so that's a lot of what we're doing. So France and England and Ireland, there's just some things happening in Western Europe that we have a huge heart for. And again, just dear friends.
Yeah.
We're always talking about all the time, like one of the greatest deficits in ministry is the lack of friendship. And even during the pandemic, like I told Karen, I was praying one time and I was like, you know what? I believe God would totally move our whole family just because a family on the field needs friends. Like
I
we
love
want to
that.
think of like
Yeah.
some like giant vision or why we're,
Yeah.
and the Lord's like, I got a group over here that's lonely
Yeah.
and needs people that understand them. And I've got this family right here that has a heart for the nations. I'm just going to sew them in here because,
Yeah.
like it could be that simple, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
good.
that's a lot of what we're doing and even like at the farmhouse, it's largely about rhythms of worship and prayer and sitting around the table and being
Yeah.
with people.
Yeah.
So,
I love that. I
snapshot.
love your love for people, and I love that pastoral heart that comes out. That's such a beautiful picture of Jesus in you guys, and even the way he's building there in Franklin. That's so relational and so worshipful, and it's just seems so pure to me, just from an outside looking in. I haven't gotten to visit, but I'd love to someday.
You
But
should
it
come.
just,
Yeah, you should come, man.
yeah, I'd love to. But it just seems so pure, and it seems so just abounding in love, and so it's beautiful, man. This has been great, Ryan. Our time is up. I know we didn't even get into the Tabernacle of David, but we can do a part two,
That's right, man.
and get
There's lots
into
to talk
that.
about.
But if people want to connect with you guys, I know you guys have some music out that people could listen to. Maybe just any ways that people, if they want to visit you or learn more or listen to your music or anything else. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, we're horrible on socials, so our apologies. But
Right.
we are on
Don't
Instagram.
follow them on social media.
We are on Instagram under We Are the Halls. So that's all like one thing. My wife and I, Karen and I, release music under the Halls. So that's everywhere you find music. And then franklinprayerhouse.com is a good way. You can DM us on Insta. You can email us through the website on Franklin Prayer House. And that has kind of our schedule and all of those things. And obviously, like, come in and the prayer room's open and, anyone's welcome to be here. But those are kind of the main things, I think.
Yep. Perfect. Awesome. We'll make sure we put those links down in
Awesome.
the description. Obviously, I was kidding. Go follow them on Instagram because they're awesome. Ryan, this has been great. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, no problem. Thanks, Matthew.
Yeah.